After Donald Trump's victory, thousands of Americans are planning to pack their bags and move abroad.
We finally left the States. We really moved to Canada.
When it comes to the American dream, I feel that I lived it, and it's literally the reason that I left.
Leave Los Angeles immediately before you become the next victim. Don't let the glitz of Hollywood, the million-dollar mansions, or the American dream blind you from reality. Los Angeles is no longer the paradise you once imagined. This city is spiraling into a nightmare, where crime runs rampant, poverty is overwhelming, and homelessness has become the new normal. Every day, over 200 people lose their homes, turning once luxurious streets into a sea of tents, trash, and despair. And don't think you're immune. When even a university professor earning $70,000 a year can't afford rent, when veterans, intellectuals, and hard-working citizens are being forced onto the streets, are you really sure you won't be next? What has pushed Los Angeles to the edge? How bad has this crisis truly become? Today, join us as we uncover what will happen if the richest state in America no longer feels aligned with the country it belongs to. That is the story of California. For a long time, this state has been likened to a nation within a nation. With the largest population in the United States, the fifth largest economy in the world, superior technology, and extremely advanced social policies. In the previous term, California had many direct confrontations with the federal government. Trump has publicly criticized California on social media, opposing immigration policies. Federal funds were cut, state regulations were challenged in court. California responded by suing the federal government more than 100 times in just the first term. And now, as Trump returns to the White House for the second time, the division has become deeper than ever. California residents are starting to ask the big question: do they still share a vision with the rest of America? Or is it time to consider a system more suitable, more stable like Canada? Protests against Trump have been taking place across California for several days.
I'm here to represent people who either don't have the safety or the support to come out and speak out against things that are hurting them.
The biggest thing that 5051 upholds is constitutional rights, which has constantly been undermined by the Trump administration.
If you remember, California was once an independent republic in 1846, albeit for a short time, but enough to mark that this place has always carried a strong spirit of autonomy. California has had many serious discussions about secession. They once organized the Collexit movement after the 2016 election, attracting support from over 30% of voters. Although it was not successful, the idea of secession has never faded in the hearts of many Californians, especially at this moment when Trump's second term is facing a wave of controversy. Even some state politicians have suggested that California should seek a new federalism relationship with Canada. If you look closely, you will notice that from universal healthcare policies, environmental protection, California sometimes resembles Canada in a strange way. Here, Medicare for All and the Green New Deal are not just slogans, but concrete actions. Besides, despite the geographical distance, California shares more political and social values with Canada than any other state in the US. In climate change conferences, California often sides with Ottawa rather than Washington, D.C. California is also intensifying defense technology and AI cooperation with startups from Canada. Even the forest monitoring and disaster response systems are being synchronized across borders. California is still a part of America, but it's living like a separate entity with a vision, policies, and aspirations unlike the rest. The issue is no longer can they separate, but how much longer can they endure? New York, one of the states that has contributed the most to America, is now beginning to feel betrayed by the very country it once wholeheartedly served. Located in the northeastern corner of the United States, near the Canadian border, the state of New York has long been regarded as a microcosm of the world, a convergence of finance, top-tier healthcare and education systems, world-leading technology, ancient cultural heritage, and progressive values. However, President Trump's second term has pushed New York further away from the federal government. Tough immigration policies, cuts to healthcare budgets, and attacks on the free press all directly contradict the values that New Yorkers hold dear. Many protests have erupted on the streets of Manhattan and Brooklyn, carrying profound messages.
Losing our money, all our 401ks for retired people. We don't work anymore. You just don't get that back.
New Yorkers are here today. Americans around the country are out on the streets saying, no way. Why? We're not going to give up without a fight.
In Trump's first term, within just the first year, this state filed over 60 federal lawsuits ranging from abortion rights to immigrant protection. Each time like that, the distance between Albany and Washington, D.C. seemed to stretch a little more. Interestingly, while relations with Washington are becoming increasingly tense, cooperation between New York and Canadian provinces, such as Ontario or Quebec, is thriving. The total trade volume between New York and Canada exceeds $34 billion each year. The two sides collaborate deeply in the fields of clean energy, smart transportation, and disaster prevention. The power grid of northern New York has connected with the Canadian power grid to enhance stability and resource sharing.
We love our Canadian customers. We see them on a daily basis, but they just want to be able to, come back and forth.
Socially, from public healthcare policies to urban environmental management, New York is increasingly resembling the Canadian model rather than the southern states of the United States. Many lawmakers in this state have called for a reconsideration of federal relations if the Trump administration continues to go against the interests of the people. You might think that's far-fetched, but remember, in 1861, New York almost seceded from the Union due to political disagreements. And in the past decade, the phrase independent empire state has appeared many times in policy advocacy groups. New York is still a part of America, but it increasingly operates like a separate system, with a global vision, an independent economy, and values of life that are sometimes no longer reflected in DC. The issue is no longer whether New York will leave, but how much longer they will still feel like part of America. How can a state feel American when it is completely separated from the rest of the country, both geographically and ideologically? This is the question that the people of Washington are increasingly asking themselves. Although it belongs to the United States, Washington is closer to its neighbor Canada, both geographically and spiritually. Right in the week of Trump's second inauguration, thousands of people took to the streets in Tacoma and Olympia, carrying banners that read, "This is not our America," and "Build bridges, not walls." State leaders immediately affirmed that they would not enforce the new immigration policies and restrictions on freedom of expression.
I'm here because we all have to stand up for our rights and to defend against what this administration is doing.
Many people in Washington are now gradually considering the prospect of this state joining and becoming a part of Canada. Not many people know that during the 1970s and 1980s, there was a movement called Cascadia, advocating for the establishment of an autonomous region including Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia. Although this idea never came to fruition, the ideals of autonomy, sustainability, and a deep connection with nature still persist strongly to this day. In fact, Canada has long been Washington's #1 trading partner. In 2024, this state signed 3 new trade agreements with British Columbia, boosting cross-border trade to reach $26 billion per year. The ports of Seattle and Vancouver are collaborating to build a green transportation corridor, a transnational ecological economic network. Socially, Washington implements community health policies, environmental protection, and universal education similar to Canada. The universal pre-K and carbon tax programs of this state were modeled after Canadian policies. In recent surveys, nearly 40% of Washington residents reported that they feel closer to Vancouver than to Washington, D.C. Washington is still a state of the United States. But if there were a new federal model where living values and development visions are respected, then for them, Canada is not just an option, but a dream coming closer. If there is a US state that once wanted to become part of Canada, it is Michigan. You heard that right. In 1840, a group of residents in the Michigan area even petitioned for Canadian citizenship due to their exhaustion with the conflicts and indifference from Washington. The story, which seemed to belong to ancient history, has suddenly come back to life as Trump begins his second presidential term with a series of controversial policies. In the first week of the new term, when the federal government cut funding to states not complying with the new immigration law, Michigan was one of the first to protest. Universities like the University of Michigan have declared that they will not cooperate with the ICE in deporting international students. Cities like Ann Arbor publicly declare themselves as sanctuary cities, which is completely contrary to the stance of Washington, D.C. Michigan shares a border with Canada that is over 1,500 kilometers long, shares the Great Lakes system, and more importantly, has an economy closely tied to its neighboring country. Canada is the largest trading partner of this state, with a trade volume reaching $70 billion each year. The car factories in Detroit cannot operate without parts from Ontario. The electrical grid, road traffic, and even the food supply chain are all tightly interconnected across borders. But the story doesn't just stop at the economy. The eastern areas, people strongly support abortion rights, gun control, and criminal justice reform, things that the Trump administration is trying to reverse. It is also worth mentioning that Detroit, once the industrial symbol of America, went through a period of collapse and bankruptcy, and is now reviving thanks to cross-border cooperation. Many electric vehicle tech startups here are currently receiving funding from Canadian funds and are directly connected with universities in Toronto. Additionally, the northern residential area of Michigan, bordering Ontario, has many dual American-Canadian communities. They frequently cross the Ambassador Bridge or the Detroit-Windsor Tunnel, living and working on both sides of the border as if there were no barriers. With Trump's new term bringing divisive policies, calls to rekindle ties with Canada are resurfacing. Not loud, not extreme, but quietly, yet clearly. Michigan once quietly proposed joining Canada. This time, will they do it more seriously? And if that really happens, is there anyone in DC still listening to stop it? Vermont, a small state, but with such a great desire for independence that it once left the United States. This is not a hypothesis, but a true history. From 1777 to 1791, Vermont existed as an independent republic, with its own constitution, currency, and only voluntarily joined the United States after 14 years of standing outside. Nowadays, amidst the rising political tide during Trump's second term, Vermont is being mentioned again as a potential candidate to secede once more. Trump's new term is rekindling the long-suppressed frustrations. Public health programs were cut, emissions control laws were repealed, and divisive social policies were enacted from Washington, making the people of Vermont feel betrayed. This state is not only located right next to the Canadian border, but also shares a multitude of economic and social characteristics with its northern neighbour. Vermont exports more than 65% of its dairy and agricultural products to Canada, receives electrical power from Quebec, and collaborates closely on cross-border environmental conservation. In addition, Vermont's culture is closer to Canada than any other state. A green lifestyle, respect for the community, and social welfare are emphasized. Residents here favor public health care, support gun control, and talk about climate change as a reality that requires action rather than a contentious issue. In terms of political ideology, Vermont stands out as one of the most progressive states in America. Policies prioritizing the protection of immigrants are in place, and local governments openly oppose many of Trump's federal decrees. It was also from this place that the Second Vermont Republic movement emerged, calling for the state to become an independent nation again. After the 2016 election, the number of supporters for secession surged, with the prominent slogan, "Although still a peaceful state, Vermont is showing that secession does not necessarily have to be a battle. Sometimes it is a principled choice." And once their principles are no longer represented in the capital, the question arises, will Vermont continue to stay just to oppose every decision coming from Washington? If you live in a place where your electricity comes from Canada, your hospital is funded by Canadians, and your relatives frequently go to Canada to buy medicine, do you still feel completely American? That's not a fictional story. It's the reality for thousands of residents in the state of Maine. After Trump was re-elected, a series of new federal policies on healthcare, environmental protection, and immigration faced strong opposition in Maine. Governor Janet Mills once criticized the Trump administration for cutting Medicaid and pushing timber exploitation policies contrary to the state's long-term forest protection goals. Geographically, Maine is closer to Ottawa than to Washington, D.C. And in terms of lifestyle, many people here believe they have been living as an extension of Canada for a long time. Nearly 90% of the timber exported from Maine goes through the Canadian market. Maine also imports electricity from the hydroelectric grid of Quebec, and the main freight rail lines all have cross-border connections. Two-way trade between Maine and Canada exceeds $4 billion USD each year, an astonishing figure for a state with just over 1 million residents. In terms of culture and society, Maine is known for its liberal conservative character, supporting a small government, but also highly valuing community welfare. The social model of Canada, with its public healthcare system, affordable drug policies, and protection for the elderly, aligns very well with the values of the people of Maine. That's why many residents here often cross the border to buy medicine, seek medical treatment, or even give birth in Canadian hospitals. Maine also once considered its own path. In 1820, this state separated from Massachusetts to become an independent state. And today, amid the increasingly intense wave of political division, many people in Maine are beginning to wonder, if America no longer reflects our values, should we seek a different relationship that better suits us? Oregon shares a border with Washington, the state adjacent to Canada, and is only a few hours' drive from Vancouver, BC. For the people of Portland or Eugene, traveling to Canada for environmental conferences, technology exchanges, or visiting relatives has become a routine matter. After Trump returned to the White House, Oregon saw continuous protests in Portland, one of the most progressive cities in the United States. Federal forces were once deployed to suppress the protesters, causing a wave of outrage that lasted for months. For the people of Oregon, that was the moment they felt they no longer belonged to the federal government. Oregon also has a notable historical precedent. In 1941, when the federal government forced the state to comply with tax and resource extraction regulations, Oregon lawmakers submitted a petition for complete autonomy, although it was unsuccessful. Nowadays, the Greater Cascadia movement, an idea for an alliance of the northwestern states of North America, is being mentioned again. This idea is not entirely about secession, but rather about building a civilized, green and progressive model, separate from federal political conflicts. Economically, more than 60% of Oregon's wood and processed food exports are directed towards the Canadian market. Green technology corporations in this state also have bilateral investment relationships with startups in Toronto and British Columbia. Clean power grids, water filtration technology, and even forest management systems. Many of these are co-developed by local governments on both sides of the border. However, the deeper issue lies in culture and politics. Oregon is one of the most progressive states in America, promoting renewable energy and offering free community college tuition to many low-income residents. Meanwhile, President Trump's second term completely contradicts those values. Oregon is still part of the United States, but their hearts seem to be turning northward. With the similar climate, forests, lifestyle, and social values, the idea of joining Canada is no longer a joke, but a real question. How much longer do we fit with Washington, D.C.? Minnesota does not share a border with Canada like other northern states, but the distance is only a few hours' drive. And more importantly, the ideological gap between Minnesota and the new federal administration is widening. Economically, Canada is Minnesota's largest trading partner, with bilateral trade exceeding $18 billion each year. Key export items such as grains, industrial machinery, and medical equipment heavily rely on cross-border supply chains. Many companies from the state also have representative offices in Manitoba or Ontario. But it's not just about the economy. Minnesota has a strong civil society and relatively progressive welfare policies, especially in education, healthcare, and the environment. Many people compare Minnesota to a small version of Canada nestled in the heart of America. Even in surveys conducted after 2020, nearly 40% of Minnesota residents expressed that they believe the current political system in the US no longer represents them. The Minnesotans for Mutual Values movement once proposed the idea of extensive cooperation with Canada, including studying the parallel federal model. Minnesota also has a unique political history. This is the only state during the Great Depression that elected a farmer Labor governor with the slogan, "Putting people's interests above profits." That spirit still exists today, and increasingly conflicts with the Trump administration, especially after federal policies cut social welfare and environmental protections. Could a Midwestern state, peaceful, humane, and progressive, feel more at home as part of Canada? The issue is no longer, does Minnesota have enough reasons to leave? But rather, how many options do they have left if things continue to get worse? Montana shares a border longer than 800 kilometers with Canada, with many busy highways and international checkpoints. Residents of northern Montana frequently travel to Alberta and British Columbia for shopping, medical care, or family visits, creating a cross-border relationship stronger than with many neighboring US states. Economically, Canada is Montana's #1 trading partner, with an annual value of nearly $4 billion USD, primarily focused on oil and gas, wind energy, mineral extraction, and agriculture. Many Canadian energy companies have invested in Montana, sharing infrastructure and local labor. The farms and meat processing plants in Montana also export most of their products to Canada. But what makes Montana special is not just its location, but its mindset. This is a state with a tradition of anti-centralization, characterized by independent conservative thought and economic autonomy. Many residents here once voted for Trump in his first term because they believed in the freedom and control of the states. But now, after Trump was re-elected and continued to intervene deeply in public lands, the energy sector, and gun control, even conservatives in Montana are starting to have doubts. Culturally, Montana and Alberta share many similarities. Residents are dispersed, rely on the land, value small communities, and embody a spirit of living off the land. Many Montanans feel closer to Canada than to political centers like Washington, D.C. or New York. In the context of Trump's second term facing fierce backlash from progressive states, Montana finds itself in a position of not wanting to belong to any side. And this is the most concerning aspect. Because when a place no longer sees itself as belonging to any side, they will want to choose their own path. And part of that path may lead towards the north. Montana was once a frontier, and today it may again be a place to open unprecedented thoughts. Is there a new federal model? where the dream of freedom is no longer colored by politics, but is a more fitting reality. The issue is no longer, is secession fanciful, but where is the place that truly respects our values? North Dakota, a sparsely populated state rich in oil, located adjacent to the provinces of Manitoba and Saskatchewan in Canada. There are no bustling cities or progressive movements like in California, but it has a very different characteristic: a quiet, yet profound connection with Canada in terms of economy, energy, and community lifestyle. In 2023 alone, trade between North Dakota and Canada reached nearly $7 billion USD, mostly from crude oil, wheat, corn, fertilizers, and industrial equipment. The cross-border oil pipeline system, especially the controversial Keystone XL, demonstrates the close energy ties between the two sides. In addition, many grid infrastructure facilities in North Dakota have been linked with the Manitoba system to ensure stability during the harsh winter. The people here, especially the farming communities, are no strangers to buying and selling equipment, hiring labor, and even cross-border marriages. What seemed like a conservative state loyal to Trump, in reality, North Dakota is increasingly disillusioned after controversial federal policies heavily impacted the agriculture and oil industries. Trump's second term, with its reinitiation of trade wars and cuts to agricultural budgets, has left many farmers in a deadlock. Not only in terms of the economy, but also culturally, North Dakota has a population of Scandinavian and French descent, which shares more similarities with Canadians than with the people from the southern or eastern United States. Values such as honesty, community, and stability are more highly valued by the people here than the endless cultural debates in DC. And especially, the people of North Dakota have a distinct feeling. We are forgotten by Washington. When their state is considered too small to care, but too important to ignore because of oil, dissatisfaction is rising. Although there is no strong secessionist movement yet, internal district-level polls have shown that nearly 40% of the population believes the current federal model is no longer suitable. Could a small, cold, and sparsely populated state like North Dakota be the one to kick off a major trend? Will they take the lead, not to go against the US, but to save themselves? The issue is no longer, does North Dakota want to leave? But rather, how long can they last if they feel abandoned? 10 states have their own distinct characteristics, but it is clear that there is a growing divide within the heart of America. And when Trump returns to the White House, this wave is no longer simmering, but has erupted in various forms. Resistance, separation, and even dreams of a future side by side with Canada. Although most ideas of secession, federal restructuring, or cross-border alliances still lie in the future, or within the realm of imagination, they reflect a real sentiment: dissatisfaction, instability, and the desire for fairer representation. Could some states actually consider leaving the Union if they feel abandoned by Washington? Or is this just a temporary reaction to political changes? Leave a comment, share your opinion, and contribute to the dialogue that all of America needs to hear. This video does not promote the division of the United States or encourage secession. All content is presented with the purpose of exploring, analyzing, and sparking discussion based on current facts, emotions, and social trends. We respect the US Constitution and all federal regulations.